What is your favorite paradox? I remember hearing about an aqueduct that took water to NYC a long time ago. IIRC. It was very effective and allowed the city to grow. The population grew to the point where the aqueduct wasn't enough anymore. It was the victim of its own success. The interesting number paradox. The first number with no interesting properties has the interesting property of being the first number with no interesting properties. Mitch Hedberg once said, "My belt holds up my pants and my pants have belt loops to hold my belt. What's going on down there? Who's the real hero?" Not sure if this is a traditional paradox, but growing up middle class in America, my parents made too much money that I didn't qualify for any major financial assistance for my college tuition, but nowhere near enough money to actually be able to afford it. I was so pissed that I still had to put my parents' salaries, of which I saw none of for tuition, board, or anything, in my FOFSA, and seeing I only qualified for loans, of which 20 years later I still am in ridiculous debt, hit the motherfucking max, and knowing if I knew a little about law back then I could have divorced my parents financially and been much better off. Rant over. You need a job to get experience, but you can't get a job without experience. The solution: lie on your resume and say you were self-employed, sole proprietor for a year or two. Just say you did freelance consulting in whatever your ideal field of work is. For this to work properly, you'll need to actually know the field well enough to pass as someone with 1 to 2 years of experience, but depending on the field it shouldn't be too hard to wing it. Also hilariously illustrated in real life by the band Sugababes. The original members all slowly left, being replaced one at a time, until no original members were left but a band called Sugababes still existed. Then the original members all got together to make a new band that had a different name. Who are the real Sugababes and who are the new band? After being harassed by pop-up reminders for a year, I finally did a Windows update on my computer. One of the things that apparently needed updating was my Wi-Fi driver. It uninstalled the old one and then ran into an error because it could no longer connect to Wi-Fi to install the new version. Holy shit, you just brought back a memory. I was in college in the late 2000s, and I thought that I could save money by installing a pirated version of the next Windows upgrade instead of paying for my own product key or buying a new computer. At that time it was popular and easy to host programs on the dorm's central server and share them between students. Generally speaking, all you needed to do was download the CD image and then mount it on a virtual drive, which would trick the computer into thinking you had a real CD in a real drive that didn't really exist. Then you could treat the image as the real thing and install or play any game or movie wanted. It was the golden age of internet piracy. Unfortunately, I went to upgrade my computer to a pirated version of Windows, using a pirated image of the Windows installation CD. Worse still, is that I thought I was rather savvy, and when I had made a system restore point, instead of burning that onto CD, I could save a few cents but by saving the system restore point onto a virtual image instead. You can probably guess where this is going, but in the middle of the uninstallation process, the virtual CD drive ceased to exist. And could not exist for the low-level BIOS to access, and I could not install Windows at that point. I also could not go back using my system restore, which also required the virtual CD player. Yeah, learning how to create virtual optical drives and burn stuff into them felt so 133T back in the day. Nowadays you just double-click and .iso and bong, by default Windows will do all that auto immediately. I remember this issue coming to my mind in middle school when I was still messing around with ideas for writing. At one point I had a character who lived in a place called the Undercity, where the poor and homeless went. A character found them there and asked why he lived there and acted as a hired thief and assassin for a living. He replied something along the lines of, "I don't have an address, so I can't get ID. I can't afford a home to get an address because I don't have a job. I can't get a job because I don't have ID. But I do have a knife, and I'm pretty handy with it." The Epicurean paradox. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? I actually kind of like C.S. Lewis responds to this. He says that omnipotence means the power to do all things. Asterisk intrinsic impossibilities are not things but non-entities. Usually when I'm using this, it's against fundamentalist claims to nonsense, but hey. I've also had the thought that, well, I'm coming from a position more like Spinoza, where God literally is the totality of everything and all potentialities. In that case, all things are possible with God is true, because God literally is all things, that's the definition. I do believe Spinoza was drawing from the Jewish mystic tradition, and one theme there is. Wow, actually, now that I'm typing it, I realize that this is a totally appropriate discussion for this thread. Because the idea is that an infinite God of pure love and goodness is limited by its own lack of limitation, it is a contradiction and thus cannot exist. The way I understand this is twofold. First, a totally unified being with no experience of division is all perception with nothing to perceive, and so it reverts to virtual non-existence. The second is, no experience or concept can exist without contrast. What are love and joy without pain? If they could even be said to exist, we wouldn't notice them. It's like how cold doesn't make any sense without hot. Of course they're relative, but the point is that without any variation, we wouldn't have either. Anyway, what mystics in the Jewish tradition, but also in others, is that we choose to live here as a part of God to experience separation and pain for the sake of all of existence. How could we choose it from a state of non-existence? Good question. I'm not sure how literally to take it. But even so, I definitely see this embedded in the subtext of stories like Adam and Eve. Another paradox here is, I think there's a risk with this kind of thinking that people will think it's right to seek out, cause, and/or prolong pain, but I think pain is inevitable. Part of the idea is that existing in separation is pain. But the idea is that if pain is necessary for the existence of everything, to experience it is a form of love. Even if you look at it in a more mundane way, it drives us to protect ourselves and change. If you ask Rick Astley for a DVD of the movie Up, he will not give it to you because he is never gonna give you up. However, by not giving you up, even though you asked for it, he is letting you down. The Astley paradox. The Catch-22 paradox. Being unable to escape situation due to contradictory rules. An example from the Joseph Heller novel is basically if you believe doing a task in the military is dangerous and could kill you, you are therefore sane and thus able to complete the mission. If you don't believe doing a task is dangerous and could kill you, then you have elected to do it anyway. An omnipotent, omnipresent, all-powerful God can't create an immovable boulder. Either God creates the immovable boulder, but loses, all-powerful, because now God can't move said boulder, or God isn't all-powerful, because he can't create an immovable boulder. Checkmate, believers. Sad clown paradox. So a guy comes to his doctor saying, "Doctor, I feel depressed lately. What should I do to feel better?" The doctor replies, "Go see great clown Pagliacci is in town, he'll surely cheer you up." But the guy replies, "But doctor, I am Pagliacci." Zeno's paradox, proposed by the Greek philosopher Zeno. It states that motion is impossible, for this logic. To get from point A to point B, you must first travel half the distance between them. But to do that, you must first travel half the distance to there, 0.25 the total distance. But to do that, you must travel half the distance to there, and so on for infinity. A line has an infinite amount of points, so you must travel an infinite number of discrete distances. Traveling infinite distance is impossible. Of course, this can be simply explained by the reasoning that Zeno was stupid. You must travel an infinite amount of distances, but that does not equal an infinite amount of distance. The sum of all the lengths you must travel will converge to a real number, the distance from A to B. It is said that when Zeno proposed this to the other Greek philosophers, one of them simply stood up and walked across the room. The ship of Theseus. The ship of Theseus was placed on honored display in an Athenian harbor. As the ship deteriorated over time, it was repaired with new wood. Eventually everything was repaired to the point where no original wood remained. Is it still the ship of Theseus? Or, as I like to put it, this is my grandfather's axe and it's over 100 years old. I've had to replace the handle 4 times and the head twice. I love owning my grandfather's axe. Zeno's dichotomy paradox that essentially says, to go from point A to point B you must first travel halfway between them. And then to get from that halfway point to point B you must reach the halfway point between those, etc. And so to move to any point you must first get halfway there, so you should never truly be able to reach point B as a series of infinitesimally smaller and smaller halfway points must be reached first. The Harry Potter paradox. By today's societal rules, if a content creator is of a certain mindset, homophobic, transphobic, racist, etc., their content should no longer be consumed and they should be effectively cancelled. However, Rowling has since been outed as a transphobe, but yet her content as Harry Potter still exists, and is even continuing to expand. Even more so, the strongest proponents of cancel culture are of the millennial and Gen Z age groups, but also the biggest consumers of Harry Potter. Galileo's paradox. There must be an equal number of positive integers and square integers, because for every n I can find an n but not every integer is a square number. So how can the number of square numbers be equal to the number of integers? The omnipotency paradoxon. If you are omnipotent, how can you create a stone you cannot lift? Either you can create it but can't lift the stone, or you create a stone you can lift. Either way you are not all-powerful. Can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it, or does he not know how to create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? It's not just wordplay, it's a realistic question. It's a paradox because God is supposedly able to do anything. The Swiss cheese paradox. 1. Swiss cheese has holes. The more cheese, more holes. 2. The holes take space which could have been filled with cheese. The more holes, less cheese. 3. Therefore, the more cheese, less cheese. Imagine you go back in time to kill your grandpa. By killing your grandpa you got rid of either your mom or your dad. Without them you wouldn't have been born. If you were never born you couldn't go back in time to kill your grandpa. This is the grandpa paradox. The Guardian finds a shotgun at the grave of the Titan Saint -14. They take it, and repair it. Later, the Guardian travels back in time, and gives Saint 14 the same shotgun, which he uses to defend himself. Where did the shotgun come from? The weapon is called the perfect paradox. Can good create a stone that he cannot lift? I love this because on its face, the paradox is, do you want a God whose power of creation is limited versus limited strength? But the real dichotomy is, would God know how to or to even be willing to place limits on their unlimited power? The Tiffany paradox. It's referred to as the Tiffany problem, and it's when somebody writing historical fiction does something that is well researched and accurate, but the reader doesn't buy it because of their perception of the past. The name dates back to the 12th century, but if a historical fiction or fantasy writer uses it, a reader is likely to insist that that can't possibly true. We associate Tiffany with diamonds, an Audrey Hepburn movie, and, well, it's a modern name. Tiffany is an English version of the Greek name Theophania, meaning manifestation of God, and referring to the Christian feast also known as Epiphany or Three Kings Day. Another ancient girl's name that sounds misleadingly modern is Jennifer, which is a Cornish version of the Welsh name Gwenwyfar or Guinevere, meaning white fairy. To anyone born in the 1970s, Tiffany and Jennifer are classmate names, not ancient ancestor names.